And so we place ourselves in the presence of God this morning.
Give ear to my words, Almighty God. Give heed to my groaning. Listen to the sound of my cry when I love my heart. For to you do I pray. O my beloved, in the morning you hear my voice. In the morning I offer myself to you, and wait for you in silence. For you are love, and you delight in goodness. All that is of love walks with you.
The humble stand before you. You dwell with those who open their hearts. You smile on those who speak truth. Tears from your heart fall on those separated from you by you. Through the abundance of your steadfast love, I shall enter your house. I shall worship in your holy temple with reverence for you.
Lead me, O my beloved, in your mercy, like my years. Make your way straight before me, and I am not alone. For there is no truth in fear. It leads to downfall. It opens the doors of loneliness. It seeks not with integrity, but out of ignorance. Let this guilt lie there, my beloved. Be seen you are right. Forgive the many false ways I have. Surround them with your love, for they keep me separated from you.
Let all who come to love rejoice. Let them sing for joy and protect them, that those who live in your love may dance in your light. For you do bless the peaceful and just, O my beloved. You encircle them with your healing love and enfold them in love. Amen. Just a question for you as you read this and look at this Psalm number 5. If you were to open your Bibles to Psalm number 5, the language you would find would not look exactly like this language, would it? For example, why don't we just for a little exercise, open up to Psalm 5. Let's just look at the first obvious difference. How is God named in the psalm, in your translation? O Lord. Hear my words, O Lord. That's how my translation begins. And how is God named in the first line of the psalm? Beloved. And so already, this is, you recognize that this is another way of imaging God. Another way of imaging God. And many words in Nan Merrill's working of the Psalms invite very creative ways of imaging God. Beloved. What else is capitalized in her version of Psalm 5? Besides beloved, heart is capitalized. You is capitalized. Love is capitalized. All those are all words that she uses for God. And I think I offer it to you as a way of not just praying from the heart, which is what she calls her translation of the Psalms, prayers from the heart, but also recognizing that the names we use for God sometimes are too limiting, right? And so when we get to the symbolic language of the book of Revelation, we need to remember that as well, that the expression of God is so much bigger than even our limited vocabulary can make words for. So someone like Nan Merrill will try to find words that speak to her experience, her emotions, her images of God as heart and love and beloved. And personally speaking, not as he, but as you. See the difference? It's a much more intimate way, isn't it, bringing God more intimately into our own prayer, rather than God being Him out there. Right? So I offer this to you as an invitation to explore that in your own prayer life, to bring God intimately into relationship with you. Because so often in our rituals and our prayers and our scriptures, God is left out there. And so we're going to see in the sections that we'll read today in the book of Revelation, that God is not out there. Even as strange and otherworldly as the imagery is, God is divinely present everywhere, everywhere. So let's take a look. Last week, I offered an outline, and I gave it on the PowerPoint presentation. Today, I gave it to you in printed form. So what you have today in your handout is a 3-page outline of the book of Revelation in the Bible. So this is from Felix Just, the Jesuit, who has a website, extensive website called CatholicResources.org. And he has constructed this structure of the book of Revelation as a way of understanding it, helping us to understand it. So that's the 3-page handout you have today. Those of you who are joining us by Zoom, I will also have that in the PowerPoint slides, and I can certainly email it to you, to the whole group, as an attachment after this session. So we looked at apocalyptic theology, the reversal of rewards and punishments. Good people may be suffering now, but they will be vindicated. Bad people may be prospering now, but they will be judged, right? Revelation as apocalyptic literature, we've been seeing that structure. Last week, we looked at this image, thanks to Bill, of San Giovanni in Patmos, and an image of the author receiving the message from the angel and being asked to write it down. Today, I just want to revisit. Cindy Manson isn't here with us this morning, but she's the one who shared this tour book of Turkey. And I'm in chaplain formation with someone from Turkey, a native of a small village in Turkey. And so I brought that with me on Tuesday this week to share in our group. And he was so thrilled to see pictures of his own homeland. And so I'm going to take it back again this week so that we can explore it some more. So I think I got inspired by that to do a little bit more opening up of these 7 cities with you. So they, in your outline, you can see where they show up in the book of Revelation, right? You see that they show up right after the prologue. You get 7 letters in chapter 2. So right after all the introductory materials, you get 7 letters to the 7 churches of Asia. And so we begin in chapter 2. This map shows the locations of those 7 cities in Asia, as well as the island of Patmos, which was an exile island where John was sent for punishment for not accommodating or not compromising with the state. All right, so I'm going to skip through, to this page. This is the, so we remember that we talked about this book as a letter that takes place in the context of worship. So these 7 letters to the 7 churches of Asia in chapters 2 and the beginning of 3 are not meant to be read as individual letters to individual churches, because this whole book is a letter. The whole book is a letter, one letter, and in fact, best read in one sitting. In one sitting. Imagine that. Going to, this is like the Easter Vigil kind of length of the liturgy, right? But that's how it's envisioned to be read in one sitting to an assembly, on the Lord's Day. Right? So these little 7 messages are included in this letter, and the letter is meant for them, but it's meant for them in totality. Okay, so they only get their own little moment on the stage, so to speak, in this section. And it begins with Ephesus. So I'll just share some photos that I found, just to give you a sense of what was life like at the time of this writing of this letter to these cities. So Ephesus, in chapter 2, Ephesus, that church is commended for their endurance. You have endured, they have rejected false teaching, but the letter says they have abandoned their works of love, which they had done so well previously. Ephesus, the capital of Asia at that time, was the capital city, the most important city in the whole province. It was the 4th largest city in the whole empire. Imagine. This is an important city. It's not a backwater village, but this is a huge, important city. So you remember our discussion of what life was like in a city with multiple expressions of worship, with deities everywhere. So this and culture, right? Greek culture. So these 2 photos, the library, and Ephesus contained an extensive library, as well as, you can see the photo on the right, a theater, a huge and enormous theater, and it wasn't the only theater in the city of Ephesus. There were other theaters. So, you're on Playhouse Square there, and this is the major culture going on, right? You're in downtown or University Circle, and this is the culture of Ephesus. And this is who this little church, always a minority, right? The Christians are always a minority among a huge majority of people who practice this kind of blended, religion. Local deities, the Greek gods, and, in the last 100 years of their existence, the Roman pantheon as well. The next letter is to Smyrna, and this is a reconstruction, an artist's imagination from archaeology and from documents of what the ancient city of Smyrna looked like. So it too looks pretty cosmopolitan, right? You can see. And they, in Smyrna, the letter in the book of Revelation, commends them for their faithfulness in affliction and poverty. And then it says, even though you are rich. And you can see why the letter would say that. Right? This is a wealthy city. This is not, again, a backwater or a tiny village. Smyrna is still a city today in Turkey. It's called Izmir. And it's as you can see, it's still a very large seaport. So it was, in ancient days, it was the first city to build a shrine to the goddess Roma. First city to build a shrine to the goddess Roma. And by the time of John, by the time of this letter to the churches, it was an important center of emperor worship. Remember? It's hard to compute, right? Consider your governmental highest authority as divine. Yeah. So, yes. Yeah. We'll leave that there. So by John's day, it was a center of emperor worship. And again, so Smyrna commended, though. I think it's Smyrna and Philadelphia are the two cities that don't get any kind of punishment or reproval or correction. These folks are faithful. Then we go to the city of Pergamum, chapter 2, verses 12 to 17. Commended, again, for holding fast to Christ's name, even in a city, it says, where Satan's throne is located. Now, what in the world? Satan's throne. So these images are from Pergamum. Again, it is, you can see in the lower left corner, another large city with impressive temples. There is a theater, and in the upper left, this is actually the temple, the altar piece of the temple that was moved to a museum in Berlin. So I'm not sure the connection. Probably because it was a German archaeologist and German scholars who probably excavated, my guess. And there's a whole museum of Pergamum in Berlin. So if we can never get to Turkey, maybe we can go to Germany and see this museum. And this piece, which you can see its proportion in, to the people there, is the altar of Zeus. The altar of Zeus. And that was on top of a hill, right? Because that's where, on the high places, that's where the temples are created, because you go up to meet the divine. And so the temple of Zeus was at a prominent place in the city of Pergamum. Could that have been the, what did he call it? Throne. Yeah, Satan's throne. Could it have been that altar to Zeus? Quite well could have been. Another interesting, just because there's been some work in something called the Sacred Art of Living and Dying, and someone named Richard, this is an aside, Richard Groves has done a lot of work looking at ancient places of healing. This city of Pergamum contained one of those ancient places of healing. They were called Asclepion. Asclepius was the, and that's where we got that symbol of the snakes entwined in more ancient times even than it was represented again in the Bible, right? The serpent on the pole. When you look upon it, you will be healed. So, and Asclepion is a place for healing, and that was also in Pergamum. So, again, we're in a city, very cosmopolitan, very advanced, with this tiny Christian minority, and I hope this is kind of giving you a flavor of the people and what it is that, they are maybe needing to hear. So they are commended to holding fast to Christ's name, even in a city where Satan's throne is located, but they are reproved for tolerating the teaching, and it gives some names, symbolic names, of those who teach to accommodate to the pagan culture. Oh, also, the word parchment comes from this name of this city, Pergamum. And it too contained a library of some 200,000 volumes. So this was a real place of learning. you can see, can't you, why there would be this struggle of people, because what advantages are there, right? If you're living in downtown Cleveland and you never go to the library, you are missing out, aren't you? Or you never go to the theater, or you just, all of that is verboten. You don't take advantage of it. It's somehow, right, you think there's a judgment there, right? Like, why am I not doing that? So too in this place, right? So there would be that struggle. Why not take advantage? It seems reasonable to take advantage and to accommodate and to live in the culture where you are. And that is exactly, precisely what John is railing against. Okay, so that is, and maybe that's our struggle with Revelation. Maybe because we feel that same way. Like, why not take advantage of all that the world has to offer us? All right, then the letter to Thyatira, commended for their love, their faith, their faithfulness, their service, their patient endurance, but it warns them again of the teaching of a false prophet named Jezebel, that wicked woman from, is that 1st or 2nd Kings, who ends up badly. She is a foreigner. She's trying to get those people to come over to her religion or to incorporate. And so John references this false prophet and gives the false prophet this name, Jezebel. Thyatira is related to another story in one of Paul's letters where he meets Lydia, who is a dealer in purple cloth. This is a center for commerce, a center for dyeing. It's famous for that purple cloth trade. I don't know if the picture on the bottom of the fountain, I would guess it's probably after the time of Revelation. It looks to me more like Byzantine or even later. But it's opulent. That is a fountain, beautifully carved. The top picture on the left is an inscription in the stone, and just to note, it puts it in the historical time of the Emperor Vespasian on the top line, but his brother Domitian, the Roman emperor from 81 to 96, erased, right? So erase him from history. So Thyatira was commended for their love, but warned of their teaching. It was a city of commerce. And you remember me saying, if you belong to a guild, to belong to a union, you had to do what the union did. And it wasn't just paying dues. It was sacrificing, eating meals, praying to the gods, and accommodating to that culture. Sardis is the next city in chapter 3, verses 1 to 6, reproved for being spiritually dead, even though they thought of themselves as lively. Spiritually dead, even though they thought of themselves as lively. I wonder, sometimes it just surfaces for me images of worshiping communities who see themselves lively, maybe great music, maybe super flashy, I don't know, all the bells and whistles of technology, or maybe, you know what I mean? Like you're going to a performance. Spiritually dead, even though they think of themselves as lively. I don't know if you've ever experienced something like that in your history. So Sardis, again, these pictures from antiquity, a synagogue, a Roman bath and gymnasium, and the temple of Artemis, all trying to live together. Philadelphia is not mentioned a lot. It's the other city that's never, it's not given any kind of correction or discipline. It is commended for holding fast to Christ's name despite all the pressures. The only image, it must not have survived or been excavated much. This is the only old image I can find, and this is really later than the book of Revelation, because these are remnants of the church of St. John. So, you know, after the book of Revelation, sometime in Byzantine, there was a basilica to John in this city. Philadelphia in ancient times honored the emperors by adding the names New Caesarea and Flavia to the name of the city. So they added names to the name of the city in gratitude for the Roman help when they had an earthquake in the early years of the millennium, of the first millennium. Then the last one, Laodicea. Cold and hot. We hear this in chapter 3, verse 14, right? You are neither cold nor hot. You are lukewarm, right? We hear that often, right? We're lukewarm. Cold or hot, meaning what scholars say, it doesn't exactly mean passive or versus enthusiastic. It means, are you for me or are you against me? You are neither for me nor against me. And what kind of criticism would that be on a church? Trying to walk the middle of neither being for the teaching of Jesus, but not against it, right? Sort of trying to be, I don't know, under the radar. Yeah, that's what the critique is. This theater I was reading has been restored for public use. So this is an ancient Roman theater, and it is used for performances today. Pretty awesome. And in the lower left, a photo of one of the Roman roads that traversed through that city. Another large and wealthy city. So those were the 7 cities, and then we last week looked at the images of the vision of John of the heavenly court in chapters 4 and the beginning of 5. Right. So that was in our book, chapter 2. Yes, the Lamb ascends the throne. And so we looked at that heavenly throne room and the liturgy that was taking place there. And what we discovered was that the divine is dwelling in the midst, right, of reality, in the midst of the entire universe, not separated, not out there, not far away, but right in the midst of it. And so we, reflected on our own liturgy as a sort of parallel liturgy happening at once here in present-day Solon, Ohio on Sunday or Saturday, but at the same time happening in this divine realm, right, where we are linked together to the past, to the future, to the entire universe in our liturgy. And that's the vision of chapter 4 of the book of Revelation. The divine, like the temple, right, that's filled with the divine presence in the Hebrew temple. So the whole universe in this vision is filled with the divine presence, the whole universe. But we see in this section of the book of Revelation, the problem of evil, the problem of evil. So God is God, the divine is in the midst of the universe, and there is this problem, this crisis of evil. it is also in the midst of the created universe. And so what to do? What to do? And that's the issue that chapters 4 and the beginning of 5 deal with. The problem and the dilemma of evil. Because it's also in the midst of the created universe, if God executes justice, then creation will also be destroyed, right? Like in the story of Noah, right? God executes justice and floods the world, but promises never to destroy again by flood, right? Here in this symbolic vision, we have God recognizing this dilemma, and so what is to be done? And so who comes, who is worthy to solve the dilemma? The Lamb, right? And so the divine, he has this decree, this divine decree, but who is worthy to execute the decree? The Lamb. So the vision shows this waiting for the right figure to come along, the one who will be put completely at the divine disposal, right? To unreservedly do God's will and fulfill God's purpose. And so, in the image of the Lamb, we get this symbolic enactment. Hey, Marguerite. How you doing? Good. Good. So in this symbolic enactment of the Lamb, we see the image of the Lamb slaughtered, right? The symbolic enactment of what happens to Jesus on the cross. Who is worthy to fulfill this divine decree? The one who gave himself completely on the cross and was risen from the dead. And what did we learn from that symbolic, from that enactment? That love is the strongest power in the world. Love is the strongest power. So in chapter 3 of our book of in chapter 3, then is where we're going to. How am I doing in time? I don't have it.
11:39.
Okay, good. So let's move to chapter 3 in this book. And let's take a look at this reading on page 39. Revelation chapter 6, and then the segment of chapter 6, verses 1 to 17. So if you don't have this book, turn to the book of Revelation, chapter 6, and we'll look at verses 1 to 17. And then he just jumps ahead to the last part of this segment, chapter 8, verse 1. So let's read this. I'll just give you some time to read through that, and then we'll talk about it. So again, this is chapter 6, verses 1 to 17, and then we skip ahead to chapter 8. Did you get through the Four Horsemen? So who was the movie director who made the black and white film, Four Horsemen? Is that who it
Four
was?
Horsemen of the Apocalypse.
Yes.
But I don't know
Who the director? Yeah. So it just makes me want to go back and get scared again. I can remember as a young person being terrified of that vision, of that image. And so we do with any kind of imagination as we read this, right? The white horse, the red horse, the black horse, and the pale green, the pale horse, right? The four horsemen, what are they revealing? What are those four horsemen revealing? Okay, war. The black horse, the horseman held a pair of scales in his hand, and scales in this sense, right? He's saying a quart of wheat for a day's pay, 3 quarts of barley for a day's pay, but do not damage the olive oil and the wine. And what is that symbolizing? It's symbolizing economic, the writers say, oppression. Oppression. So there's war, there's economic oppression. These are consequences. Are they consequences of God? No, right? This is human-caused disaster. This is what the Four Horsemen are revealing. And I think that's why that movie, right, is so frightening, because it's like another unveiling on a movie screen of the consequences of human choices, disastrous consequences of human choices, right? Then we get the 5th and 6th seals. So I'll give you a moment to read that paragraph. It's called in this book on page 39, A Change of Scene. So these are kind of a different vision. All right, so what do we see? An altar, right? So again, this is a place of worship. So it's a change of scenery. He's back in a place of worship. And under the altar, the souls of those who have been slaughtered. When I went to Bethlehem, and this is the only image I could find of it, I took bunches and bunches of pictures, but I didn't take the time to look those up. The Bethlehem University Chapel is a chapel that's dedicated to the Holy Innocents. And all of the walls, so this is just a segment, one segment. So imagine all of these walls in this room with these paintings, which is what this is, this in the chapel. So all of the walls painted with images of children. And can you see what they're carrying at the top? Some of them have lamps, oil lamps, but you can see many palm branches, the symbol of martyrs. Palm branches are the symbols of martyrs. So this chapel dedicated to the Holy Innocents, to children martyred. The martyr's prayer, right? They cry out here with a loud voice, "Sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long will it be before you judge and avenge our blood on the inhabitants of the earth?" The martyr's prayer, not a cry for personal vengeance, is it? No. Think of any stories. What other stories of martyrs do you know? Maybe even modern day martyrs. Oscar Romero, Sister Dorothy Kazel, martyrs. Their prayer, their cry in the book of Revelation is not a cry for personal vengeance. And we can see that in the lives of contemporary martyrs as well. Not cries for vengeance, but the cry that says, "Oh God, do not let sinful society triumph over the good." Right? And isn't that still the cry of martyrs? We support an advocacy organization who writes letters on behalf of modern day contemporary martyrs. And in South America, I don't think we hear a lot about it in the news, but we have heard about the destruction of the Amazon. Well, there are activists who are trying to keep that from happening right now, right today. people who might be indigenous, right, to the land. They haven't been, they didn't come from somewhere else to mine or log or ranch or whatever profit making can happen there. They may be indigenous people, and they say this land needs to stay the way it is for the health of us and for the health of the world. We get notices of sometimes 30 a month, people who have been either harassed or worse than harassed, violently either kidnapped or harmed or murdered in our day in those places in Central and South America. And so we sign letters and we say, this is not right to murder human rights activists and people working for the good of the planet. So it's not just the martyrs of old or storybooks, but the cry of the martyrs, like Sister Dorothy Stang. Anybody ever hear of her? She was murdered in the 90s or early 2000s, I think. Again, standing with people who were indigenous, small town, small villages. But it's not a cry for vengeance, like we see in movies. It's a cry to God to not let this happen, not let this happen again, but let the good prevail. Let the good prevail. And so I think it's an appropriate image for the University Chapel, for the Holy Innocents, right? To be our image of the martyrs. The visions continue. The sixth seal is opened. The earth quakes. The sky is black. And does that harken back to any other images of when something happens and the earth quakes and the sky goes dark? The crucifixion, right? So this is hearkening to the event of Christ. Stars fell to the sky, fell to the earth. Fig tree drops its fruit, just like that. Sky vanished like a scroll rolling itself up. What an image that is. Like a scroll rolling itself up. Every mountain and island removed, etc. And they say, everyone hides from this awfulness, right? And they say, fall on us. They say to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us. Hide us from the face of the woman, seated on the throne, and the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of wrath has come, and who is able to stand? And then this little passage jumps to chapter 8, verse 1. When the Lamb opened the seventh seal, there was silence. The place of silence. I just want to ask you that today. And maybe that'll be where we end and pick up with chapter 4 next week. But I want to ask you about the place of silence. When have you been reduced to silence in your own life? Think of a moment in your own life that reduced you to silence. So was it trauma? Pat?
The death of a loved one.
The death of a loved one. Same with you, the death of a loved one. Okay. Holding vigil with someone dying. if you would like to share, I know not everybody will want to share your moment of silence. But if you'd like to share it with your table, feel free to do that. Or those of you on Zoom, if you'd like to type it in to the chat feature. For some people, being reduced to silence is an experience of great joy. I was in school, and this was a writing prompt that we had. It was right about the time when you had no words, when you were reduced to silence. And some people wrote about, I remember one woman wrote about when her husband proposed to her. It was total joy. She was speechless. Another one wrote about a visit, surprise visit of her mother. And she was so thrilled, so overjoyed that she had no words. What is the place of silence? And what is the good? I want to ask that of silence. In the prophets Zephaniah and Zechariah, silence is the prelude to the divine epiphany. There is silence, and then God is revealed. But there's this movement. And what does it do? It prepares one to receive what's coming. Silence before speaking. In our prayer, I don't know if we're as aware or attuned or appreciative of the role of silence in our prayer and our ritual. I remember when we were in the worship space first, and the cantor was in the choir area and made that long walk to the ambo for the song. And there was silence. And some people maybe thought, what, it's taking so long? I'm anxious. Isn't it true that so often silence leads to anxiety? You need to fill it with something. But there is a role for silence in our worship. Bill.
We tend to think of noisiness as a characteristic of modern life. And I'm wondering if that's just our own perception. Maybe these people 2,000 years ago thought that their lives were busy, 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 and noisy, noisy, noisy as well.
So
people are more alike than different.
Yeah. Would this have been a busy life, right? Would this have been a busy life? This looks like a busy life to me. The potential for a business. These are cities, right, where there's a lot happening. Busy life. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that. So in life, we need silence. Do you ever get time? Yeah. Isn't that always the question? For a deeper spiritual life seems to imply a need for silence. So the earth, the whole universe in this moment of the seventh seal is silent. As a way of preparation for what's to come, for the divine epiphany, as a way of reflecting on what has gone before, right? Everything that has been seen, everything that has been experienced, the trauma, the joy, the life experience, we are reduced to silence. But it's in silence, isn't it? Where the divine will speak to us. And so we move then to the next section. It's not the end. It's like a coda in the musical, right? It said, you know, let's go back and this is the song that so we get more visions. Yes.
So it's because I'm like reading this and I'm thinking, so the world was quiet for about half an hour.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's
What?
about half an hour. It's like real specific. So is that why it's telling us that it isn't the end, that something else is coming?
Something else is coming. Yeah.
Okay.
Because silence is not the end. It is not the end, but a prelude to something more. And so it is for us. Are we at time?
You got 1 minute.
All right. So just open your books to page 47 and we'll end here. I just love this. This is all, a lot of this in your book is like for your own reading. This, I just love this page, 47, hearing revelation as poetry. So I like, and he quotes Kathleen Norris, right? And as you were reflecting on this, you know, I keep reading and it's a half hour of silence and then what? There's more, right? Most of the text, it says, marches down the page, regular blocks of type, but if we read it as poetry, or he says better, listen to it being read aloud. Which, as you know, a letter in a church, in worship, that's how we get it. We hear it being read aloud. Kathleen Norris describes hearing revelation read aloud at a monastery. She said, in a way, it opened her eyes. The simple magic of hearing the Bible read aloud opened my eyes to recognize the extent to which I had allowed the resistance of the world to shape my faith in the kingdom of God. She found poetry an antidote to a sophisticated worldview. And again, a sophisticated worldview, right? In this day of these images of, you know, where these cities are located, a sophisticated. Poetry is an antidote. As I allowed the words of John's revelation to wash over me, and notice all the emotions which we feel when we read this book, to be repulsed, offended, attracted, moved to tears of grief and anger and joy and wonder, my full sense of the sacredness of the world revealed. She was struck by the way all the angels of Revelation in the figure of Christ himself continually tell John, do not fear. If we read John's letter as poetry, we too will hear a melody of hope. John's voice is like the bird in Emily Dickinson's poem. And we'll end there. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all, and sweetest in the gale is heard. And sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept summer. So keep hope as we continue in the book, and we'll look at chapters 4 and get into chapter 5 next week from this book. Dave. Okay. All right. Thanks everybody for joining on Zoom and for joining here in person. See you next week for chapters 4 and 5. Okay?
4 and 5.
Of this book. Yeah. Of the Revelation, God's gift of